Today I'm going to discuss an action sci-fi horror film called Cold Skin. Spoilers ahead. Look careful and take care. We are never far away. We will never be completely close to those we love unless we distance ourselves from those we despise. The young Englishman's haunting thoughts continue as he sets sail for a remote South Atlantic island to work as a meteorologist. While his thoughts drown him out, Captain Axel approaches him and lights a cigarette, telling him that they're almost there. In September 1914, they finally arrive on the island where no one greets them. But there appears to be no sign of anyone. Captain Axel accompanies the young man to look for the previous meteorologist to ensure his safety. They come across a lighthouse and knock on it, but no one answers. The young man forces the door open and finds Gruner, the signal technician, who greets them both coldly. When Captain Axel asks about the former weather official, Gruner answers that the man they're looking for died. From when he returns to the cabin to fix his things, he finds the previous meteorologist's diary revealing his name as Alder. Inside he sees sketches, a photograph of Alder's wife, and even a lighthouse drawing with strange creatures beside it. The next morning, he discovers strange rock circles on the sand. He then heads near the coast with the telescope to begin work. As he looks through the binoculars, he notices a naked man stretching in preparation for a long day of doing nothing. That night, while he's reading, however, the noises become increasingly louder, with scratching and growling silences, until a reptilian hand appears at the bottom of the door, which he promptly steps on, resulting in the unknown. When he hears more, he hides under the floorboards. When they try to enter his cabin, they attack but notice that there is no one inside. When the footsteps stop, he looks through a small hole in the floorboard's door. The creature peeps through as well, causing him to poke its eye with a knife. Feeling afraid, he locks himself underground for the entire night. He sees Gruner leave the lighthouse and pursues him down to the rocks before the cabin entirely burns down the next day. When he is about to ambush Gruner, a blue female sea creature attacks him and he points his gun at her. Gruner stops him from shooting her by demonstrating her vulnerability. The young man then takes advantage of offering Gruner some of his supplies in exchange for shelter. Gruner then calls the man a friend for the sea creature to recognize him as one. When he arrives to the cottage to get his supplies, he finds that the previous weather official died from marine animals rather than typhus. Still, Gruner informs him that they must return to the lighthouse. Because it's getting close to sunset and the creatures might attack, they lift the supplies into the beacon, and after a long walk, Friend passes out. One morning, Friend is awakened by the female sea creature licking his hand trying to heal his burns. It turns out that he's been asleep for 2 days. He tells him that the creature he labels a toad is similar to a dog that would not forsake her owner no matter how harsh he is. He is a buddy who looks at her, attracted by her presence, giving her the feeling that she is different from the rest. But Gruner advises him not to trust her completely, fearing that her quiet and serene attitude conceals sinister intents. Gruner then shows Friend more of the lighthouse and takes him up to the top. When Friend arrives, he wonders why Gruner chose to stay on the island when he had the opportunity to leave, but Gruner tells him that he will never return to the civilized world now that he is the master of his own destiny. Still, a buddy assures Gruner that he will get on board when the next ship passes by, to which Gruner bids him luck. Later that day, a buddy reflects on how a few days of seclusion had affected him as he adjusts his belongings. He's astonished by the creature's appearance, but he still studies her as she ignorantly consumes a candle while he tries to explain the function of a candle to her. Gruner summons him and orders him to bring his rifle that night. Fred observes Gruner as he prepares for the attack. The elder man advises him on what to do and ignites the flare gun, signaling the start of a long night. While the female creature wails into the sky, a swarm of sea creatures rushes towards them, and Gruner begins shooting. However, his friend becomes overwhelmed, and he slowly walks backwards until he passes out, leaving Gruner alone to fight the terrifying swarm of sea monsters. The next day, Gruner is enraged at his friend's ineffectiveness, telling him to fetch water instead. When he returns, he hears pounding and wailing in Gruner's room and, to his surprise, sees Gruner thrusting himself into the sea creature. Gruner and friend eat lunch in awkward silence later that day. Friend cannot confront him because he feels guilty and uncomfortable at the same time, but Gruner breaks the tension by banging the table and telling friend that he only has one last chance that night. Gruner catches the attention of the creatures as he takes the flare gun, but when the monsters appear, friend is frightened again, causing Gruner to lock friend outside on the balcony, leaving him to fend for himself against the monsters despite hearing gunshots and screaming. When the creatures attack several nights in a row, forcing them to keep vigil, the days are always the same, the nights are getting longer, and only nature keeps them sane. They manage to coexist where friend's everyday task is to fetch water while Gruner maintains their weapon. One day friend speculates that the creatures are returning to the lighthouse to reclaim the female sea creature, but he still wonders why she allows her species to be killed and why the Gruner doesn't care why the monsters appear and intends to eliminate them all later. Buddy visits his old faded cabin to reclaim some of his belongings only to discover how he has changed his appearance. As he looks in a mirror he trims his beard hoping to have some sense of his old self. On his way back to the lighthouse he comes across a massive whale skeleton and picks up a piece. Still there are no attacks that night, making him believe that the loss between the fighting are often worse than the battles themselves, but they still take. While walking about, a buddy notices the creature and approaches her for the first time. As he feels her icy skin, he begins to admire the weird entity and names her Eneris. While Gruner uses her as a servant and sex slave, one evening Gruner invites a friend to play chess. As they play, the young man shares his observations and hypothesis on the existence of sea creatures, but Gruner asks him to shut his mouth and play, urging friend to perform a checkmate. Then picks up his gun and points it in the direction of the young man as he perceives a creature behind his back. It turns out the sea monsters are already on the attack. They run into the higher point of the lighthouse as more and more monsters arrive. They fight with their rifles but are getting overwhelmed as the attack came too suddenly. Still they decide to go up to the lantern pane where the light illuminates. Unfortunately Gruner is badly bitten on that. This is the end of his life. Eneris takes care of Gruner's knee and foot while sticking her tongue into the wound, while Gruner sings a terrible love song till the sun rises and the monsters leave that morning. They cannot survive another war because they are running out of supplies and ammunition. Later that day, while roaming, friend notices a ship in the distance and immediately runs inside to get the flare gun, fearful of having no one to hate. Gruner restrains friend as he is about to shoot, pinning him to the ground. Daenerys tries to protect friend, which enrages Gruner, causing him to walk out with the flare gun. Feeling frustrated, friend yells at Gruner, telling him that he's afraid of being left behind and fighting alone. A little while later friend finds a way to communicate with Daenerys by showing her a boat that he carved out of bone, hoping that she would understand. Daenerys then leads him to an abandoned rowboat on the shore away from the lighthouse. He also states that the ship's cargo contains explosives, but he figures it's all soggy. Meanwhile, a buddy wants to dive into the wreckage using an atmospheric diving suit, but Gruner objects, informing him that what he is proposing is a suicide mission. One afternoon, the young man paints the rowboat in the hopes of getting it to work. He then hears a howling from the distance and finds Daenerys enjoying a swim nearby. As he removes his clothes, he slowly approaches her as if he's going to kiss her. Gruner hands him a diving suit and changes his mind after seeing what they did in the pool and secretly hoping that friend will perish in the attempt out of jealousy. The next day they row out to the shipwreck using the boat, and the young man explains that a rope tug is their only means of communication while friend is underwater, telling Gruner that he will tug the rope 3 times if he needs air supply, after which he dons an old diving suit and looks for the crates carrying dye. While submerged, a buddy discovers the container and quickly attaches them up. After wiring up a few little boxes, the friend notices a baby sea monster peering through his suit, causing him to tumble. He tugs on the rope and begins to worry as more of the creatures approach him. When the young man releases himself from the suit and swims up into the boat, Gruner immediately assists him up. When they get home, they immediately check the crate and find that only one box contains explosives that are dry enough to use. Winter is approaching, and both Gruner and friend are on the verge of abandoning their friend. plan to lure as many creatures as possible into the lighthouse before setting off the planted dynamite in the hopes of scaring them away, but that night no one was attacked. 3 weeks fly by, and Gruner is growing impatient while waiting for the big attack. A friend finds him frozen outside and asks him to go inside and defuse the detonator for a while. He kicks her and blames her for alerting her kind about their scheme to frighten them when she brings starfish instead of fish. The angry man grabs the friend's shirt and tells them that their new strategy is to leave the door open, luring them inside for an ambush that night. The friend watches as the door is left open, and the Gruner takes the upper hand, getting ready to detonate the dynamite. They've been waiting for hours and speculating that they won't attack them. Aniris is forced to scream by Gruner as he drags her close to him in the hopes that it will attract the animals. A sea creature is attacking a pal at the front entrance. In the meantime, the creatures attack, but Gruner is unable to detonate the explosives, causing friend to run to the top of the lighthouse and reconnect the detonator, causing an explosion to occur, killing many sea creatures, leaving friend feeling unsatisfied. He manages to escape them, but more creatures are coming in. He rushes upstairs while alerting Gruner that they are now inside the lighthouse. When Buddy awakens the next morning, he immediately goes in search of Gruner and wakes him up. The young guy is relieved when Gruner moves and begins singing a song. Gruner then goes for a second set of explosives closer to the lighthouse, knocking both friend and himself out, which he this time joins a Buddy thinks the species are more sophisticated than Gruner paints them after spotting one of the dead animals wearing a necklace as Gruner uses a spear to kill the injured and dying toad on the beach. In the meanwhile, indignant, Gruner snatches the pendant and throws it into the water. Later, as they wait for the next attack, a friend overhears Aniris and several other creatures lamenting the extinction of their species. Gruner runs up to the friend and tells him that he saved Daenerys when she was a baby trapped in a net years earlier. Her life is owed to him. Daenerys disappears, but Gruner promises him that she will return as she usually does. On the other hand, Gruner is still preparing for an explosion to continue scaring away the beasts, but there is still no attack that evening as friend fixes Gruner's mess. Gruner is cold and has no remorse towards the creature's death. One morning friend circles the stones in the sand and places the carved bone in the middle, hoping to get rescued. While the old man is sleeping, he finds a wedding picture of Gruner with the words love, love, love written on the back. Realizing that the woman in the picture matches the woman in the diary and that Gruner is a former weather official, he realizes that Gruner isn't completely without empathy. As a result, the friend erases his day counting because he realizes everything is forgotten, including the very reason for his visit to work, because there is no work to be done. With her warriors, Daenerys approaches him from behind the kid. Her buddy observes that they desire a peace, whilst Gruner does not and merely wants Daenerys back, but Gruner fires a flare at the child, fatally striking him in the chest, as he walks back to the lighthouse. Daenerys looks at friend with disbelief and disappointment before leaving him alone. As Gruner continues to fire at them, friend pursues him and, after a struggle, knocks him to the ground and stabs him in the leg. Furious Gruner gains the upper hand and attempts to kill him with an axe, but the friend calls him by his real name and tells him that he is not a murderer. Gruner pauses, drops the axe, and says, "Love, love, love," as if he has regained his former self. He then goes outside and observes the starry night where the sea creatures kill him. A few months later, the next ship arrives to the new Gruner waits at the balcony gazing at various boats while Daenerys rushes into the sea where she swims freely. Man keeps his part, believing that this is the item he was looking for. A world war would spell the end of humanity as we know it, but it gets worse. He left one mysterious past behind only to find the same thing on an island. He was fleeing in search of peace through nothingness, but instead found a monster-infested inferno. In the end, he finds peace after realizing there is no such thing as life. Without love, there is no hope. Without love, and without love, there is no humanity. Please subscribe, switch on alerts, and leave a like. Doing so supports the channel.